I have no idea. I just know there's like a British version
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. This is how we clearly know we've gone off the rails here. Okay. When we start talking about British soap operas.
Yeah, we were talking about the cost of groceries, so it's kind of what we were going to get into.
Yeah, I was going to say we can get into things here. I think with our episode, right?
Oh yeah.
Shall we? Hopefully, we can rip through this as quickly as possible.
Yep, I got to keep an eye on my battery.
Yeah, battery and down.
Okay. We're doing good. Still at 90%. We got time.
Perfect. So, I know we've already kind of talked about this, but you and I had discussed for today's episode that we would touch upon something that I think both of us would agree impacts, like kind of similar to how democracy and some of our other episodes that we've done, something that impacts really every aspect of our lives. And that, of course, is money. Right?
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. Money is any aspect of your life has some connection to money.
It's the driving force for most of us.
Yeah, right?
In our day-to-day, yeah.
Maybe why you get up in the morning.
Yep.
It's how you're able to eat. It's how you're able to do things, right? Money and currency, that whole kind of concept. So for today's episode, we are going to be discussing about money and currencies, and kind of the base point to start with when discussing money and currencies is actually going to slightly touch upon the banking system as well with that, right?
Yeah, like an origin story of currency.
Yeah.
We'll probably get close to where we are now by the time we're done.
Yes, that's the hope, that we're going to kind of figure out where we came from to understand where we are now.
Because as we all know, now where we are now will take another million years to analyze by the greatest of minds.
Yeah. Why did we do this? Yeah.
Help us, Bill Maher. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So kind of with that being said, like Jordan just mentioned, and I just mentioned, we're going to do like a bit of a history. So if we're kind of looking at a brief overview in history of currencies, we really have to go back to the kind of first system, if that makes sense. For why you even, or actually not even before I even get into that, I guess the first kind of thing that we want to really look at is, why do we even have currencies, right? And that's probably a pretty obvious answer, even just from what we've already discussed, right, in just this little intro. But the main kind of purpose for currencies has always been built around trade, right? So the exchanging of goods and services. Yeah. So obviously, if you go back to the very, very early stages of civilizations and tribes and stuff like that, you have a situation where a group of people would get together, form a little tribe. They probably would share everything that they had, right? Because they're kind of hunter-gatherers, that kind of...
Everybody, one group of people goes, gathers all the berries, the other group goes, gathers all the wheat.
Yeah.
Or harvests all the wheat, yeah.
Yeah, and it's heavily influenced by the fact that at that time, civilizations, I don't even know if I can call it civilizations, but I'm going to call it that. People didn't have enough ability, kind of thing, to just kind of support themselves, right? It was very evident that it takes a village to kind of raise a
person,
a family type of thing, right? Yeah. Which I mean, I think Jordan and I would both argue that that's still the case, but it's a little harder to see nowadays, right?
Yeah, with all the modern luxuries and all this.
Yeah, you're a little more disconnected. But back in the day, right, that would be the case, right? You really, like Jordan said, someone has to be responsible for food, someone's responsible for maybe figuring out shelter, water, so on and so forth, right? Eventually, as population grew, and as, for that matter, as one tribe would start to interact with another, or one, like a full out country interacting with another, right? Like whatever you may look at, um, we really see the emergence of what is called the barter system. Again, probably something you have heard about. The barter system, of course, is the idea of trading one good or service for another, right?
Right.
So
In
we, let's say,
in
I
the
don't know.
early days, the globe wasn't as well connected, so one region might only have goats, and you need like goat for everywhere. I guess maybe just I'm not sure why,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
whatever.
Well, or to that point, maybe um, one area has larger animals for like meat sources and other things, whatever.
Yeah, whereas like another area is better
Or
at
it's
like
just like
more water or
berries
something,
and
or
yeah,
yeah,
sure, more water or something along those lines. So um, you would take those things and you would go to one another and you'd say like, okay, I got this goat. Can I trade you for some wheat or whatever it may be? Maybe it's other furs, or kind of think back to your um first colonialism type of thing, for when people came to the new world, quote unquote, and
yeah. You
would
needed,
trade for furs, right? Like,
yes,
here's
correct, yeah.
tobacco for some furs, or
And we
here's
brought you
guns for
steel,
furs. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Here's
right.
stempered steel to cut through buffalo hide, yeah, like all the fun,
Yeah.
like yeah,
So, of course, in that scenario, no one's exchanging any kind of money, right? There's no
yes,
currencies. The currencies are the physical goods and services that you're kind of exchanging back and forth. And you're going to kind of see throughout this episode, that really, the story of currencies, and money for that matter, is really a history of trying to solve one problem after another. So, as you can probably imagine, it gets very difficult to sustain a barter system, because you have goods and services that are obviously going to be valued at different
right,
rates,
yeah,
right? Even in a barter system. So let's say a hypothetical scenario, right? If I was a farmer who raised cattle, right? And wanted to go get some flour, and let's say Jordan uh has a flour mill, right?
yeah.
He grows wheat and
I live
mills
at a
his own
point in the
flour.
river where it's easy to mill it. We got the water,
Sure, yeah,
moving
for
water where I
whatever reason
live.
I can't
Yes,
do that solely on my
yeah.
own.
You
We're
have to
not.
live more where the water's pooled downstream to keep your cattle thirsty, and
Yeah,
drunk, right? So
yeah.
it's yeah,
And I should say, kind of going off that, this kind of comes with the rise of agriculture as a whole, right?
yes.
When we shifted away from hunter gatherers, and kind of people stuck
We
to like,
started
hey, this is my
providing,
role.
creating more goods, specialized things
Yeah.
that took
Yeah.
time and effort to do and resources.
Yeah. And that it wouldn't have been that multiple people were creating the same thing. It might have
Correct.
been that in a village or a town or whatever, um, maybe Jordan's the only person who grows wheat and makes flour, right?
Yeah. And then I trade it
Um,
into the rest of the town, and then in turn they, yeah,
yes. And so on and so
provide me with
forth.
all the essentials I need to keep a home running or whatever.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. So, in that scenario, right? So I have cattle. So I have whatever. I have cows. Um, and I'm trying to go to Jordan and get some flour because I want to make some bread. As you can probably imagine, um, a cow is not going to be valued the same way as flour is, right? Because you can produce a lot of flour in comparison to the
Takes a while to
raising
get one
and
cow. Yeah.
producing, so to speak, yeah, of a cow. Exactly. So sure, I could have a situation where I say, hey, you can have this cow, but I need a lifetime supply of flour or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's 2 years supply or whatever. Like,
Yeah, where it's how do you value those things, right? Of course, from Jordan's standpoint, it also has the issue of, can he commit to kind of selling his crop for the next 2 years worth of flour to me just for one cow, right? Of course, maybe that can be valued that way, but there's
yeah,
other
that's
things
very
that
true.
Jordan needs to pay for, so to speak. What was that?
No, it's like, oh, in my head, it's fair trade.
Yeah, yeah.
I know how much
Uh,
meat you get off a cow.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, it would, but it's the idea that it would fulfill maybe the kind of food source that you
But it
need, right?
doesn't. There's still a
But it
gap in
does.
other stuff you
There's
need.
lots of other
Exactly.
things,
Yeah.
exactly. And not to mention, if you're going to use the cow for actual meat, well, then that's the finality of it, right? You've
Correct.
now uh, the cow is not going to
You
produce
can't use
anything
it to
other
make
than that
cheese or
point.
whatever. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You're not going to have it to till your fields or whatever. Nevertheless, right? So, as you can probably imagine, right, there are a lot of issues with the barter system, right? How do we value goods? Um, and then also on top of that, which we haven't really touched upon, is the idea that what happens when, let's say, Jordan does trade the cow for the flour type of situation, right? Um, what happens when Jordan needs more food of some sort, or some other item, right? That
Wood
maybe
or
I have.
firewood. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I have access to, yeah, cattle, and let's say I have access to a forest, so I have a bunch of firewood as well, right?
Yeah.
What happens when the only thing that Jordan has to offer is this flour, but I don't need that flour because I already have enough, right? So the value and the desire of that particular good, it's not like flour isn't useful and all that kind of stuff, but to me, it's not worth anything because I already have an abundance of it, right?
Yeah.
So that desire for those goods in the first place and the value in general is the kind of real sticking points that kind of as societies we had to overcome, if that makes sense, with the barter system. So fast forward, obviously the barter system does exist for a period of time.
Yeah.
Um, Eventually, what kind of comes out of really Mesopotamia with the Sumerians is the first kind of, um, as far as I know, the first real kind of impact of this, and that's with cuneiform tablets. And
Yeah.
so that's probably something that you may not have heard of before, but basically what it was is the first ever IOU, right? Um, it was a tablet. Cuneiform is the language that ancient Sumeria used to write. It's a bunch of lines type of thing. Um, that's how they would write basically like a contract almost. You can look at it that way.
Yeah.
Um, to to acknowledge an exchange of goods. So um, instead of me taking whatever a few tons of flour for my cow that I'm giving Jordan, um, instead
Yeah.
now Jordan's going to write this cuneiform tablet that says that this tablet itself is worth X amount of
Yeah.
flour, let's say, or goods from Jordan,
In
right?
that
So
in the same value.
yeah, relative to what the cow, or the difference. Maybe I took some of the flour in the
Exactly. Yeah.
initial,
You
and
took a
then
month
the
supply.
remaining
Yeah.
amount that's due, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, it's a, you can look at it as like a contract. You can look at it as kind of like a receipt almost, or whatever, right? But the nice thing about that system was that for the first time ever, you didn't have to trade a physical good or service just to be able to get another physical good or service. Because the cuneiform
Yeah.
tablet in itself, sure, I don't know, I think that they were made out of like clay or something like that. Um, in theory, I guess the clay had to be scooped out of the ground. So there's some effort put in that sense. But for the most part, the cuneiform tablet itself didn't really hold any value other than what was written on it.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
conveying
and
information.
and yeah, exactly. And that would be what was binding, right? So the value of, hey, this is worth the amount of a cow, that you can then come back to me and get X amount for it,
Yeah.
right? The neat kind of part about that, beyond the fact that you didn't have to um, trade a physical good, was that you also had a situation which eventually came out of cuneiform tablets, was that if Jordan and I did that exchange, right? So Jordan's given me a cuneiform tablet. Instead of me going back to Jordan with that cuneiform tablet to say, hey, I'd like some flour, I could kind of piecemeal that cuneiform tablet in a sense to use it to trade to other people in our village,
Yeah.
that they could then go get flour from Jordan, right? In exchange for, maybe I don't know, I needed someone who makes stone tools or metal tools.
Furs or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
does maybe someone who takes my cows and makes leather with it. I don't know, right? Like, consider all the things that people need in
Yeah.
life: food, shelter, education, you name it, right? Luxury goods. Maybe it was, hey, I wanted this necklace or something like that. I could now take that cuneiform tablet, as long as, again, that someone valued what that cuneiform tablet stood for, right?
Yeah.
But I could take it and give it to them, and then exchange for goods. I didn't have to. You could kind of have that same cuneiform tablet be utilized for multiple
Different
exchanges
things.
of
Yeah.
goods. Yeah. It wasn't one single transaction that occurred. It was multiple kind of chains with that. So it's a pretty cool system in that sense, because this is the first kind of um,
Currency.
yeah, it's the first tradable currency, and yeah, it's in its essence, it's the first form of money, I would say, because currency, obviously, you can describe
Yeah.
that as anything of like value for
Yeah.
exchange. So the
Water
barter
could be
system,
currency. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So the barter system had its own sense of currency, but this would be what you would call our first sense of money,
Yeah.
or in our kind of,
Physical, tangible. Yeah.
yeah, I think in our modern sense of what a lot of people think of money in terms of currency
This
in
is
that
where we're
sense.
looking at the origin. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Cuneiform tablets were really that first kind of step. Um and kind of, like I said before, with the whole idea that it's kind of solving one issue with another,
Yeah.
is the history of currencies and all that kind of stuff. Is um so as great as cuneiform tablets were, there was an inherent issue with them, right? And that is the fact that, and you probably already have figured it out, that in me getting a cuneiform tablet from Jordan, that cuneiform tablet is only useful for going back to Jordan.
Yeah.
So, and not only is it only useful for going back to Jordan, it's only useful for the goods that Jordan has to sell,
It's only
right?
good. It's like a coupon in a sense where it's only
Yeah,
good to
yeah,
be
it's like,
redeemed for
get your
whatever it's
free
assigned
flour.
for.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
At this
Um,
location. Yeah.
at this, yeah, specific store, yeah, this
Yeah.
location. Yeah, it's such a great way to put it. So of course, right? Like, if I was trying to trade with another town, like not maybe a neighbor, so to speak, right? Or if I wanted to trade with someone even in my town, but everyone only has cuneiform tablets from Jordan, for instance, and that means all I can ever get is flour.
Yeah.
Um, there are obviously, as you can
More
imagine,
things.
yeah, issues with that. Because it's not going to, you're not getting the diversity of goods and the ability to kind of use it with multiple people,
Yeah.
right? like from a validity
You
standpoint,
can't
right?
exchange it with any other for any other service or good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if I'm whatever. Let's say I'm exchanging this cuneiform tablet, and they're like, I've never even met Jordan. Like, what
Where
do you
do I
mean?
go? Yeah. Will you
Yeah,
even accept it from me? Like, yeah.
yeah. Do I even know that this is legit? Right. Um.
Yeah.
So, kind of out of that, of course, is as humans have always been kind of good at with doing is we find a problem and we try to find a way to solve it. Um, we as a society, so to speak, tried to look for a more universal form of currency. Um, One that still took on the value of how cuneiform tablets didn't require you to trade the physical goods and services that you're trying to trade for, but at the same time have something that was a little bit more universal that would be accepted maybe within an entire country or even further.
Yeah. Like starting in a city state, but like spreading out kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. At this time, there's not really countries. You're still
But
talking
yeah,
more
same
states. You
idea.
know what
Yeah.
I mean. I appreciate that. Um, so yeah. So there's been a few different things that have kind of come up throughout the histories, right? Everything from shells to painted rocks to
Yeah.
lots of different like kind of items where I mean, don't get me wrong. Obviously, shells and rocks have their own kind of utility and value in some capacities, but for the most part, like it was an item that could be used as a currency.
Excuse me.
No worries. That didn't need to be used for kind of something else, similar to how the cuneiform
Yeah.
tablets were just. It was
They
nice that
weren't
they could be
universally
used.
accepted. They were very specific. Yeah.
Yeah, but also like from the utility of the physical good that was being used for.
That's okay. Yeah.
It wasn't that it was, oh, I really need these shells for something else, so I can't afford to use them as a currency, right?
Currency. Yeah.
Um, as you can probably imagine with something like painted rocks or even little seashells and stuff like that, the issue is that um, there's a lot of them, and anyone could kind of go pick up a rock and paint it, so to speak, or anyone could go
Exactly. Yeah.
like go to the seashore and try to gather some
And now
shells.
you've got like a lot of currency for yeah.
Yeah, you somehow now have all the money in the world
Yeah.
type of situation, right? So um it wasn't able to be a very stable form of currency, right? um but there is a form of currency that kind of came out of this, and this is probably arguably one of the biggest impacts, I would say, of the human history, um, in terms of this kind of moment. And well, I should just say it. Uh, Eventually, we settled on gold as being the most reliable solution for
For
a form of
currency.
currency. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so the impact of using gold as our method for exchange, um, from kind of here on out, relatively speaking, there,
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but um, it's probably one of the largest driving factors of our like human history.
Economics. Yeah.
Yeah, from from an economic standpoint, especially, but of course, from an economic standpoint, that's a real like a large driving factor of
Encompassing.
just
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, everything.
Wars.
Um,
Everything. Yeah.
yes, thank you. Yeah, it is a huge, huge, huge thing. So, um, yeah, gold becomes the form of currency, um, and the way that they do it is they create gold coins, right? So like
Yeah.
minting of gold coins becomes the first kind of way. Now, the only thing I did want to bring up, and I know I've asked you about this because I always thought it was kind of interesting. Um, Different than the seashells and things like that. I always wondered how enough gold coins got into circulation, because it's one of those things that like you'd have to be accepting that you're giving out gold, right?
Yeah, to everybody. Yeah,
Yeah, right. Like so
which
now it
nowadays
could
isn't a. Yeah, people don't think about it nowadays, but
yeah, we almost just accept that like money is just whatever. I go to the bank and I get my money type of
yeah,
situation, right? But I would make the argument that different than the kind of uh, paper money that we have now. Again, not trying to jump too far ahead here. Gold feels like it's a way more valuable currency in some ways, like as a
yeah,
physical item, not just what it
to
represents.
own. Yeah,
Yeah, because even back then, right, the gold's used for jewelry, gold's used for
like the royals would like put it in like clothing and yeah,
yes, thank you. That's such a good point, right? So it had purposes and utility from the get go in that sense. Um, so yeah, I've always been kind of curious. I haven't really ever done
how
too
yeah,
much research into it. I'm sure it was kind of one of those things where it was a gradual process, right? Where
it kind of
maybe
like
the mixture of the barter system
and
slash
it's like
some other kind
watered
of
down. It's not like pure 100% gold. They like mix it with like something else.
maybe. I mean, I don't really think that was the case. I think it was more that probably a lot of people were still utilizing the barter system depending on where they were, right? Because
Yeah,
again,
yeah, this time
um,
too.
like cuneiform tablets is more or less exclusive to the Sumerian Empire. Now, that's a large area. um,
Yeah,
but and there were versions of cuneiform tablets that kind of existed in other places. But I think for a large part before gold, people kind of still utilize the barter system to the best of their abilities, right? Again, you're not always trying to trade a whole cow, right? Like so there
yeah,
are ways to make the barter system work that don't seem so extreme. Um but yeah, nevertheless, I'm sure it was a bit of a gradual situation, but it is kind of an interesting thing to think about, right? Like how the gold kind of came into circulation as a like standard form of currency,
yeah.
um, from
Just the
the
barter
original
system too.
origin of
Yeah,
it. Yeah, to kind of justify whoever had that gold, right? Who's then going to take it and mint it and then put it as a currency. You got to be
definitely.
willing to give up your gold to be able to buy whatever you're buying,
Yeah,
um, and then kind of so on and so forth, right? So gold coins become the main form of currency, really for hundreds of years. Now there are obviously um, some variations in the sense of as time goes on, there are other precious metals that become minted as coins,
silver and
um,
yeah,
to kind of when it all really kind of comes back down to the value of gold fluctuates. As gold becomes more valuable, you need to have a currency that's worth a little bit less. So then maybe you have silver coins, maybe you have copper coins, maybe you have
copper, yeah,
whatever, right?
bronze or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah. So just know that precious metals, but gold being the kind of
the
main
mainstay. Yeah,
form of currency, or even all the other precious metals are kind of backed by gold in that sense, um, in terms of their relative value, I should say.
yeah.
Um, and as kind of the theme that's been happening with this episode, gold coins come out. That's a really great invention, but of course they are not perfect. As you can imagine, we don't use gold coins anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a few issues that kind of come up with gold coins. The one, like we've kind of touched upon it, was the value of it, right? And they kind of deal with that with creating different versions of both in the weight of gold. So
Yes, hence
may
why
like
there's all the old pictures of the scales, right?
yeah. So if you had whatever 1/8 of an ounce of gold coin, there's all different things. So that
Yeah,
kind of allows for a little bit more fluctuation in terms of how much value your gold is worth. So that one was a little bit easier for them to deal with. The larger issue really comes into play with the fact that carrying around a big purse or sack or whatever of gold coins to be able to go shopping in the local market. One, very clunky, very like gold's not light.
Yeah, you can't
Well,
just
or it can be light, I guess,
yeah,
if you have a
because
really thin amount, but
freeways and all that stuff are very recent and stuff like driving around
yeah.
cars and trucks. That's all still
Yeah, you're
relatively new.
you're
Yeah.
at best you're on a horse. If not, you're walking, and
Yes.
yeah,
Maybe if you're
right. Like
lucky, you have like a mule or something to help shoulder some of the weight, but still, you're carrying a lot of goods with you.
yes, yeah. So even if you weren't kind of carrying like a giant sack, even just like a little coin purse, right? That I'm sure you've seen in whatever a movie or something like that. Um, that is a bit of a pain to have to kind of carry that around. But of course, the other thing, and I mean, we still even have it today with purses and wallets and stuff like that. It makes you a little vulnerable, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, it's not easy to hide gold coins.
No.
It's not easy to protect it and all that kind of sense. So, and especially at like arguably speaking, throughout our history, things were not exactly the most stable in terms of safety and security, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Um, even just like the idea of modern policing is a
Still,
relatively new
yeah.
thing, right?
Sherlock Holmes
Um,
times. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, so bandits and things like that, just local robbery type of situations. Um, were a major concern for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
So the weight that you have to carry, the aspect that you can kind of be like security risk, so to speak,
Yeah. Okay.
of
Yeah.
people robbing you.
Yeah.
Those were kind of major issues. And then there's one other issue that really becomes, I would make the argument, potentially the real kind of sticking point with gold, kind of in connection with those two that I just mentioned. But um, as you can probably imagine, if I had a gold coin in front of me and I gave it to you and I said, "Hey, this is worth whatever, 1/10 of an ounce of gold," right? So
Yeah.
let's say we already like gold has been established as a form of currency. All the
It's now the
value of
accepted
gold
trading
is based off of weight, right? Because it's the amount of gold is equal to the amount of stuff that you can
value.
buy, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, the value. So I come to you and I give you this gold coin and I say it's worth whatever. Maybe it's even written on it. It says it's whatever, an eighth, a tenth, a fifth. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's worth an ounce. I don't know. And it's a giant piece of gold or a larger piece of gold. Um, uh, if I'm doing that, right? So I've told you it's a 1/20th piece of gold. You don't really have, unless you're maybe someone who has a scale around or something like that, you have to pretty much trust that I'm telling the truth.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. I was
this
gonna say.
1/20th piece of gold is what I am saying it is. And
Yeah.
not only that, so you have to trust that the weight that I'm saying it is, aka the value that I'm saying it is what it is. But you also have to trust, like what you were kind of also alluding to earlier, that it's pure gold,
Yes,
right?
and not
That
like
like because
cut
I could
down with
because weight wise, I can kind of create weight in whatever. You can have an ounce of
nickel,
feathers if you really want
bronze.
to, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever you want. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can add other metals in there, to kind of, maybe it's just a gold plated coin, right?
Yeah.
That I'm using to kind of trick you in that sense. So for everyday people, they're kind of at the mercy of, well, society as a whole, right? Like
Yeah.
unless you have a scale, which again, most people do not.
Right. Yeah. Not a gold
And
scale. Yeah.
well, it's really any scale, because it's just really just figuring out, like you'd have to have something that weighs what
Yeah,
the like
yeah.
ounce or 1/20th of an ounce or whatever. Um, you'd have to know, like I'm sure if you whatever seen in movies and TV shows, or if you're a Christian and like have seen like Jesus when he goes to like the temple when they're like coin like doing the like exchanges or whatever with the Romans.
Oh,
This
okay.
is the this is my childhood kicking in of
Yeah.
things that I had to watch in religion.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, right. Like whatever. It just really is that you have to have a scale that you can kind of match one for one in the sense of like, okay, this
This
has
is
to be
this
weighted
is
this,
what
so then it
this is
has to be
supposed to
equal,
be.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that technology and the actual physically owning of those things, there's not a lot of people that had that, right? Money lenders and stuff like that
Yeah.
throughout history obviously
It
have had
wasn't
that.
household
Maybe certain
items.
businesses, if they were wealthy enough, might have had that. But a lot of people pretty much took things at face value, which is a very kind of discerning and difficult standpoint to
Yeah.
take, right? Um,
Yeah. It's an open way of doing it.
Yeah, so we kind of have those three major things, right? We need to know if the value of our gold coins are what the people are saying they are, and then we have the kind of like safety and security combination things, right? It's a pain to carry
Yeah.
around a bunch of gold coins, and we're at the risk of being robbed, right? So those three things really kind of cover the main issues that come out of the gold being a form of currency. Um, and of course, we come up with a solution with that naturally as a society. Um, and that comes in the form of goldsmiths. So, goldsmiths, um, I guess if you don't know what I mean by that, are the people who were minting these gold coins. So, creating the gold coins in the first place. So, they would kind of melt down this gold and they would
Smithies. Yeah.
they would kind of form the golds into these coins based off of the weight that they're supposed to be. Um, and the kind of one of the things that you've probably seen it on all of our currencies today. This is kind of the history of this, of why we have our gold, our coin, or our currencies
Currencies. Yeah.
have images and things like that on it. So, um, something that you'll find on any currencies today is the value of that currency and then some kind of image that kind of authenticates it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that really comes out of the goldsmithing era, right? So goldsmiths, whether it be a local goldsmith or a goldsmith that worked for whatever the Emperor of Rome type of situation, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. It's the exact same situation where it's like I'm stamping what the value of this is, so how much in weight, so to speak. And then maybe on the other side, I'm putting some kind of ornate image, right?
Yeah.
In the case of the Roman Empire type of thing, you would have maybe the emperor's face on it because it's like this is a valid currency within the
Yeah.
Roman Empire
It's
type of
got the
situation.
Trajan's face on him. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, something like that. In more kind of non-empire situations where it's just maybe city states and stuff like that, and a little bit more free for all in terms of the goldsmithing is not centralized, which a lot of that was the case in the beginning.
Yeah.
um, you would have maybe that goldsmith, like, so if I was the goldsmith, I would kind of create a little image that I would want to put on all my gold coins so that you would know that if you saw a gold coin with this image on it, whatever that may be, um,
Yeah.
you would know that that gold coin belongs to Braden's goldsmithing.
Which is
Um,
like in this case, we would say this is a legitimate goldsmither, so you know it's you're getting.
well,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up. So, what happens is that, like, in terms of like kind of solving some of the issues that we already had, right? So
Yeah.
one of the issues we said was, how do we know if the value of this gold is what it is, right? Um, and reputation is really the way that we kind of solved that, because it
Yeah.
wasn't easy to be like, okay, everyone's just going to have a scale now, right? Like
Yeah.
that's just not going to be a reality.
It's not feasible. Yeah.
Yeah, especially back then, and I don't even think it would be feasible now. So instead, what happened is that a goldsmith would earn the reputation of be like, no, if I get a Braden's gold piece,
Stamp or
like coin,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, like a gold coin with Braden's name on it, so to speak, I can trust that that is going to be what it says it is, right?
Illegitimate. Yeah.
So that's kind of one part of it, and kind of in connection with that, um, of course, over time, images become more and more ornate and kind of intricate, to make sure that people can't kind of copy them, right? You don't
Yeah.
want people taking your image and just putting it on kind of
Anything. Yeah. Which we know
lower
is.
quality, yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
craftsmanship, just so that they can kind of cut their gold in that sense, um, to make it, to stretch the value, if that makes sense. So that was one side of it. Then the other side, of course, was that, again, that safety and security piece. So as
Yeah.
goldsmiths, I would have to bring in a bunch of gold. Maybe I don't know, however I'm bringing that in, whether it's just my job and I get it, or I own a gold mine, however, doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But because I'm the person who melts down that gold and mints it into coins, I'm going to be storing a lot of gold at a given period of time. So I myself have a lot of safety and security issues. Now, I'm not walking around necessarily with that gold, but I have to store it somewhere. And I need the safety and security to know that that gold is not going to be stolen no matter what.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, because naturally, because of that, I had to create vaults, or I had to get armed guards and security and take all these different measures to make sure that my gold was safe, right? So that I can continue my business as a goldsmith.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so everyday people, what they would do is, eventually goldsmiths kind of offered this as a bit of a service, is that they would store your gold for you. So if Jordan would come to me and he would say, "Hey, I have some gold that I'd like to deposit with you. Can you keep this safe for me? Maybe it's for a little fee, right? Um, that like whatever, I have 10 coins, you can keep one. I don't know. That might be an extreme valuation, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Um, so you would store your gold with me and I would keep it safe, and now I would you wouldn't have to walk around with your gold, so that's great. You could come back to me and get your
It's
gold whenever
safe.
you
Have to worry
needed
about
it.
being robbed.
Yeah, you don't
Yeah.
have to keep it in your own house, which, let's be honest, back in the day, that's not a lot of home security aspects.
Yes.
That doesn't
Yeah.
exist. And then the other kind of part that kind of comes out of this is that, when you deposit your gold with a goldsmith, the goldsmith would write you a receipt, right? Because of course it's hard to keep track of all the gold that, if
Correct.
everyone comes to me and brings me a bunch of
You
gold,
come back
you need to
with
know.
your note showing how much you have, so they can remember to
Correct.
go.
So
Get your
it's
stuff.
like,
Yeah,
I write
sorted.
down Jordan and I say he deposited this amount on this day, and I certify it as Braden and blah 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 blah. Right.
Yeah.
So Jordan has this piece of paper that tells him, okay, it's like balancing your checkbook almost type of situation, right? It's your bank statement.
Yeah.
So you know what you have in your deposited with me specifically. So the neat kind of thing that kind of comes out of that. So yeah, just to close the door on it, that solves kind of those main issues, those three issues that we were kind of talking about already.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Correct.
The safety and security stuff, the how do you value things, all that kind of stuff. So
Correct.
gold becomes a pretty stable currency in that sense, right?
For quite a while.
So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, for quite a while. But it's not too long that after, which we kind of maybe have alluded to, is that The neat thing that comes out of those receipts that you get from when you deposit your gold with a goldsmith is that, similar to the cuneiform tablets, you now have a contract or a receipt that in its own light has value,
Value, yeah.
because you can take that receipt
And
back to me
claim
as the
your
goldsy
gold.
and
Yeah.
claim the gold. So this is kind of where the expression, so to speak, of like it's good as gold
Yeah.
kind of comes from, is that the paper receipts are eventually what people choose to use as the form of
Currency.
currency.
Yeah.
So they're all still backed by the gold, right? Like at the end of the day, that's what's the
The gold's
value.
there physically, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like the uniform tablets were backed by the flower or the cow
Correct.
or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of the the standpoint of value, but the ease of exchange with just a piece of paper is so much nicer than constantly having to go back to the bank and be like, okay, I need to take out this much gold because I want to go um, buy this, right?
Yes, yeah.
So
Any goats for whatever, yeah.
yeah. So people start using the receipts as the main form of currency. It's also a reason why um, nowadays all paper money is higher value than the coins that we have. Like
That's
you don't
correct.
ever have like a $10 coin.
No.
I mean,
That'd be
maybe that
so
exists,
ridiculous. Yeah.
right? But in a general sense, yeah, that's not the way that we do things, because it's just not, doesn't make sense, so to speak, from an ease standpoint.
Yeah.
So, the paper money, or the receipts, become kind of the main form of currency. It's all backed by gold, which is a great system, right? Like it makes
Yeah.
things really easy. Fast forward a bit, right? So that's how kind of things were going. Bearing in mind that we're really, even still today, right? We're dealing with a history where there are only, kind of relatively speaking, a few people that own most of the wealth, right?
Yes, yeah.
That has been, unfortunately,
Consistent.
has been the case for a large period of time, kind of once the creation of empires and all those things, and
Power is kind of funneled to the top, yeah.
yeah, even city states that where, yeah, power is exactly are get a little more centralized within a few people, right?
Yeah.
So there is a need for people who don't have as much to be able to kind of get started or be able to buy things or whatever it may be, right? Maybe you don't have access to anything. Maybe you yourself have you can provide a service, but maybe the only way to provide that service is you need to get a certain tool or something like that.
Yeah.
So you need to get like kind of started with your entrepreneurial uh, um, experience, right? Like in that sense.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is kind of, again, we've already talked about the receipts being used as a bit of like that IOU, right? Similar to the cuneiform tablets.
Yeah.
Um,
It's now replaced it, but it's backed with the gold that's actually there. And
yes,
you switched your bartering items now for a form of currency.
correct. And so, going off of this idea that there are some people that don't have but need to get kind of the local currency to get their lives started. Um, this is kind of the creation of what's known as institutional lending, right? Excuse me.
Yeah, like a business loan. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what it means by like institutional lending, I mean, obviously, most of us know what that is. A bank, for instance, is an institution nowadays that we go to the bank and we get a loan from them, right?
Yeah.
Institutional lending is exactly that still at this point. The difference is that they're going to goldsmiths to get that wealth.
Oh, wealth. Yeah.
So that loan, you go to your local goldsmith. So whatever, someone comes to me and I'm a goldsmith, and they say like, "Hey, can I get a loan for X amount?" Right.
Yeah.
And so I can choose to give them the physical bag of gold. But we've already kind of established that nobody wants the physical gold, right?
Gold.
I want to have the
Yes.
value of that, but I don't want to carry that around.
Round. Yeah.
Excuse me. Um, so what I do instead, of course, is I write you a receipt that says I've lent you a loan of this amount of gold.
Value of gold. Yeah. 20,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
And of course, you whenever you need the gold, come get it from me, type of situation. But and you have to pay back this kind of interest on it, right?
Yeah.
And so what I would do is I'd have to have that written out. You would take that, you'd go on your way, you'd be able to purchase a bunch of things, because again, the paper can be, maybe you come back to me and like split it up into multiple papers, so it's like I want 2 coins per paper or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
So you're not trying to just trade this one piece of paper for everything. And so that system works up until a point, because what happens is I, as a goldsmith, realize that, hey, I can lend out my money, or sorry, the gold, with paper, where I don't really have to show or physically give you any kind of gold. So you have no idea what's in my gold vault, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I get to make money off of giving you, hypothetically lending you gold, where you're going to pay me back interest on over time. That kind of situation, I guess, leads to greed kind of taking
wheel. Yeah.
yeah, like it unfortunately it takes the main aspect of the gold currency industry. So what happens is that, let's say I have, I don't know, 100 gold pieces, like gold coins in my vault that I actually physically have. And that might be a mixture of gold that is mine. It also might be a mixture of gold that you, Jordan, you deposited earlier
Left
with
in the
me,
bank. Yeah.
right? Yeah. And so I say to myself, okay, a bunch of people are coming to me. They want to loan out. They want a loan for 10 gold pieces, right? So, or even maybe they want 100. I don't know. And so what I say is like, okay, I can, because I know that you're not coming to get your gold anytime soon, and
Yes.
the other
Yeah.
person down the street is also not probably going to come get their gold anytime soon, because really everyone loves this idea of paper money, so it's not a big deal. Why don't I loan out the entire amount that I have in my vault? So I loan out 100 gold pieces. So I have 100 gold pieces. I've now loaned out 100 gold pieces, but the 100 gold pieces that I had in my vault in the first place were already spoken for.
Correct.
So not only were they spoken for, but you are going around and spending that gold.
Correct.
Because you're using your receipts to whatever, buy milk.
Whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is, buy some clothes. And so that 100 gold coins is now worth 200 gold coins, let's say. Right? Because it was already spoken for, and I've now loaned it out to another whatever
Third
10
party,
people.
Yeah,
or third party, whatever. It doesn't matter amount of people. It just matters the amount that we're talking about here. So that's now 200, and then it goes even further. So maybe I've even, not only did I loan out the entire amount, but maybe I did it again without even getting any more in. So now I've loaned out 200 gold coins, and then another 100 gold coins that were already spoken for. So now that same 100 gold coins is now worth, excuse me, is now worth 300 gold
300
coins,
gold coins, yeah.
right? And so on and so forth, right?
Down the chain it goes, yeah.
Yeah, and it really comes down to that idea of like, if I don't get caught, right? Like, I'm going to just keep on doing
Keep
this,
going,
right?
yeah.
And so that works, so to speak. There's obviously inherent issues with that from a standpoint of the gold, again, you got to remember, is valued based off of the amount of gold that exists, right?
Yeah.
So the amount of gold that's in circulation based off of the total, like the physical weight versus the amount of like coins, like how it's divided up, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. There's only so much physical gold. If you now have created kind of 3x to your gold type of thing out of nowhere, then the value of that gold kind of doesn't equate. It's not 1-for-1 anymore, right?
Yeah.
You now that made that coin worth a third of what it's worth.
Correct, because you've lent it out now.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
However, yeah, obviously it depends on how many times over you're lending it all out, but you get the idea. So that, of course, major red flags right there in itself, but people don't notice that. Not really right away, because of the fact that the average person is really just, hey, I'm buying a thing of milk here, or I'm buying a some clothes. So it's little one-off, smaller things. It's not large purchases that you may
You're gonna
may
notice
see
it.
it, or feel a little close to home nowadays. Not to jump too far ahead with things, but yeah. So yeah, you're the value of things kind of goes under the radar. But it's not until, of course, when or Jordan, you come back to me and then you say, hey, I'd actually like to take out some of my physical gold.
Yes.
I maybe you have to buy something that the person that you're buying from wants the physical gold, or maybe you're moving. Maybe you're planning on going to another place and you're like, hey, I gotta take my gold out.
Up and leave. Yeah.
Yeah, like I need to. I want to have the physical gold so I can go spend it and deposit it somewhere else.
Where you're going
Right?
to? Yeah.
Yeah, move into a new city state or whatnot. Right?
Yeah.
So you come to do that to me, and let's say you do that, and I don't know, one or two others do it. Right? And let's say that total is now, like, let's say between the four of you, you have the value of 120 gold coins.
Yeah.
Right? Not even 300, not even 200, just 120. And we already talked about in our scenario here that I only have 100 gold coins physically on me.
Yeah.
But you all have come to me for different reasons. Doesn't really matter. But you want your physical gold. Well, I'm 20 gold coins short.
Yeah.
Right? So when you guys all come to me and I can't give you your gold coins, right? It's different if just maybe you came to me, you wanted 30 gold coins. Nobody knows then, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I can cover that. But when I can't cover the loans,
the whole lot, yeah,
or the deposits or whatever, right? Like, because even a person that has a loan may want the physical gold coins to go purchase something, right? Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're a depositor or you're a credit,
if you're withdrawing,
taking things on loans. You may come to me, I don't have the ability to pay that. And that's what causes the kind of first ever idea of what's known today as a bank run.
Yeah. Okay.
So you can kind of, again, I'm going to kind of use the things like interchangeably. Goldsmiths and banks kind of become one and the same, as you would kind of imagine, right? Goldsmiths, you can deposit, you can get a loan, you can like, you can do all the things that banking does today.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of a shift over time. Goldsmiths move away from actually minting of things; they just become like banks. But nevertheless, this idea of bank runs start to happen, or like a goldsmithing bank run. And so what happens is that because you can't get your withdrawal,
You can't put in
everyone
money out.
loses faith in me as a goldsmith, right? So I'm ruined, right? Braden's goldsmithing. I've overlent. I don't have the money to pay like anyone who has kind of money with me, whether it's a loan or a deposit, is like,
Otherwise,
oh
yeah.
my goodness, I'm ruined. Like I have nothing. I can't do this. And so not only do all of you guys panic that are connected with me, but let's say there's another goldsmith within the town or like the city or whatever, right? Like so on and so forth. And other people hear about the fact that, oh, Braden wasn't able to pay the people, right? That the money that they deposited with him. And
Yeah.
so you go to your goldsmith and you say, hey, I'd like to take out my money. And the goldsmith's like, sure, okay. And then another person comes and is like, hey, I'd like to take out my money, and so on and so forth. Because they're
Yeah.
all are now like a little bit panicked because they're like, I'd rather know that I have my money, right? Like I want to physically hold on to my gold to make sure that it's safe. I'm
It's
now
there.
like
Yeah.
sketched out about this situation. Like I want to hold on to this. And so a bank run really is this idea that kind of like one bank after another
Yeah. It's just,
collapses
yeah.
because they can't pay back their deposits. Yeah, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, no, no.
Okay.
No, it's like a chain reaction, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. It's a chain reaction where yeah, people essentially lose faith in the economic system, the currency system, because they don't trust the banks. And then, of course, because no one really controls me as a goldsmith or as a bank, um, we all are overlending. Maybe not everyone's overlending to the same extreme,
But in
but
general, yeah.
as long as you're overlending, if you have a situation where enough panic is there, where enough people are coming to take a deposit or a withdrawal out, you can ruin a whole banking system,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's really kind of the history of goldsmithing and banking for a really long time.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's not until all things considered relatively recently.
Recently, yeah.
Yeah, there are some attempts kind of throughout history along lines of this, but
Breakaway standardization of that, yeah.
yeah, so because everything's decentralized, like banking is individual banks, individual goldsmiths, all that kind of whole thing. Um Eventually what happens is that countries or city states like so technically actually the very first uh um version of this is actually a city state that does it. It's um I think it's I think it's Amsterdam, if I remember correctly. Um,
Okay.
that Amsterdam is the first kind of place ever on Earth, as far as I'm aware. So, feel free to fact check me. Um, that creates what's known as a central bank, right?
Okay.
And so a central bank, as you can imagine with the name, is that you have centralized banking. That all the banks, it's you can look at it as like the bank of banks, right? So it's where all the banks kind of get, maybe they're putting their deposits in. The
They
central
keep
bank
their
also,
central, yeah.
yeah, also dictates kind of what what are the rules around banking, maybe like how much you can lend or all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, how
Excuse
much
me.
money you can, yeah, give it over again
Yeah.
and again, yeah.
Yeah. So, in central banking, right, you you have it in Amsterdam. You eventually have it in I think it's Sweden.
Okay.
Nevertheless, there's a history of it, right? And it's not until kind of like in terms of places like the United States and stuff like that. Really, in the United States, you don't see it until it's 1907.
Yeah,
I
early
think, if I
20th.
remember, 1907 or 1911, something like
It
that.
was just before the First World War. Yeah, it was like
Yeah,
1911 or
yeah,
12 or it was just. I think it
yeah,
was Wilson.
somewhere within
Yeah,
there. Again, the history aspect in terms of timeline may not fully matter, but I mean, it kind of does. But for the purposes of our conversation, I feel
at
like
the
it's
moment.
not a
Yeah,
huge deal. But yeah, so centralized banking kind of comes about within our like human history, so to speak. Um, like I said, it's the banks of banks, and the way that it works is that the banks within the given area, like so, whatever the central bank governs. Obviously, in our Amsterdam scenario, or not scenario, but in when Amsterdam did it, it would be all the banks within Amsterdam. If it was
yeah.
Sweden, then it would be all the banks in all of Sweden,
Sweden.
right? If
Yeah,
it's the Bank of
it was
England, it's all of
centralated
England.
or
Yeah.
centralized. Sorry.
Yes, exactly. So, all of the banks within that area that the bank governs have to give a portion of their deposits to the central bank.
Yeah.
And the reason why they do this is that if, let's say, the same scenario, so slight backtracking or aside or whatever you want to call it, institutional lending does not go away, as you know,
No.
right?
Yes.
You can
We
still get
know
a
that's
loan.
around. Yeah.
Yeah, it still exists. uh the reality is we loan out more than what banks actually physically own. That
Well, yeah.
is the history of of banking.
I think it was 1912 because this is going back to where without me getting too far into it because I haven't read too much into it. But what happened was is some families came to the government and said, "You don't worry about the gold reserve, just keep printing money, and we'll handle the rest." So for about 100 years, we've been printing money, but we don't actually have the gold reserve to back it.
Oh no, that happens a lot later.
Later,
Not
yeah, okay,
1912.
yeah, that is later. Okay, yeah.
It's I think I'm pretty sure
So yeah, I'm getting it mixed. Yeah, I'm getting my
it's
dates
like
mixed up.
so okay, if you really want to go down this road, the US I had some notes randomly. Um the US tried a few times to do centralized banking in the late to early, like so late 1700s, early 1800s. They tried a couple times, or tried within like over a few years.
Yeah,
Also like 18 like early 1800s, like 1816 to 18 like 30s. They tried again, both times unsuccessful. They couldn't pass it through. I think it was probably couldn't be passed through Congress, or maybe the banks didn't agree. I don't know, one or the
yeah,
other.
okay. This stopped. Yeah,
And it's not until it looks like 1907, 1908, somewhere within there, the U.S. Uh, the well, just prior to that, the U.S. goes through another financial crisis, bank runs, and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Um, and so J.P. Morgan, who I mean, a lot of people know that name because they exist as a bank,
yeah.
um, brought to Congress that he's like, okay, we need to make centralized banking. So that's the Aldrich Verland Act. If you
Okay,
want to get all historical with it.
yeah.
But that's basically the act that was passed by Congress to create centralized banking.
Banking.
So
Okay,
yeah, early 1900s is basically what you need to know. But yeah, it going kind of back to kind of what we were talking about is just the centralized banking is designed to bail out banks. So in the case of the United States, like we'll get into this, but like the United
Yeah.
States has the Federal Reserve. Canada has the Bank of Canada. England has the Bank of England, so on and so forth, right? And so these central banks, they take in the deposits or a portion of the deposits from all these banks, right? That are under their governing ship.
Yeah.
And those banks, though they are still kind of over lending, they're over leveraging themselves. If they ever run into a situation where enough people come and say, hey, I would like to withdraw my money, my gold, they, even if they can't cover it, they can go to the central bank and say, hey, I need to pay out this
So
amount.
and so, yeah.
Yeah, to pay back all the people. It basically allows for the appearance that banks are stable, that they haven't overspent or over leveraged their money, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's the big kind of value of a centralized banking. So for all we know as everyday people, right? I got my money, so I'm not worried. There's no bank run, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no panic. There's no, hey, one bank collapsed and another bank collapsed and so on and so forth.
Where is my money
Because the
going to
central
be?
bank
Yeah.
is able to kind of cover that, right?
Yeah.
That, of course. Oh, I should say the other kind of cool thing that comes out of a lot of central banking is prior to that, each bank, just like the Goldsmiths, had their own banknotes, right? Like their own currency,
Yes, their
like
little
so.
signature. Yeah.
Yeah, their own like stamp type of situation. So you could be walking around a city with banknotes from Braden, banknotes from Jordan, banknotes from whoever,
Yeah.
and they all look kind of different, right? They might be valued the exact same because they're both represented by a certain amount of gold, right? But
Yeah.
the look of them, it's like as if you were playing with Monopoly money from a bunch of different versions of Monopoly, right? Like,
Yeah.
but you're playing on the same board in that sense, right? Like, so it's all kind of maybe different colors, different images, all that kind of stuff. Central banks kind of can all that and say this is the form of currency that all of the banks will be using.
Going forward.
Doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you are in this area, your money looks like this. And that's why today, right? Like we have, if you go whatever, you want to get a $20 bill from TD Bank or whatever, like
Yeah.
it's going to look the same as if I went to RBC or CIBC or
Exactly.
BMO
Yeah.
or whatever, right? Like it's all the same in that sense. And that's the
Standardized.
same
Yeah.
just about really anywhere in the world, right? Like the States or India or
They have,
China,
everyone's got
all.
their own. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a kind of another cool aspect. So centralized banking, it's the way to bail out the banks, and it also is the way to kind of dictate some of the rules, right? So obviously the look of the currencies is one thing. The other aspect is how much people are allowed to lend out, right? How many times over can you lend your money? So one, they've already taken some of their money in the first place as like a safety net, but certain central banks still control the amount of lending, like how many times over. Like uh, let's say whatever 60% of my deposits have to go to the central bank, so I'm left with my like 40% of total deposits, right, on
Yeah.
book. How many times can I take that 40% of book value and lend it out, right? Like, can I do it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times,
Before it's
so
not
on and so
worth
forth?
anything. Yeah.
Well, or before I kind of broken the rules. Now there are some jurisdictions where they don't, and that kind of is like a bit of a history that's changed a lot. But in the beginning, it was more focused around the bailout, and then they still said, banks, you can take that 40% and do whatever you want with it, right? Like,
Yeah.
so of course, if the central
Okay.
bank can't cover the
The costs.
total amounts of loans, then yeah, that's when you get into central banks failing as
Yes.
well. Which in history that has kind of been the case, but a lot of central banks were kind of smart enough to think about, hey, you can only do this whatever 5 times, 9 times over,
Yeah, not 10
right?
times. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Based off of the total value of things. So, that all works kind of great. Again, minor bank runs type of situations do happen, based off of, like we said, the overlending of things. But for the most part, central banks were aware of like the kind of sweet spot for the amount of lending that banks could do, and they were able to cover it.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 1929. Jordan, I'm going to put you on the spot as my history guy. What happens in
Black
1929?
Friday stock
Yeah.
market crash.
Yeah. So the Great Depression happens.
The not
19
cool version of Wolf of Wall Street. Yeah.
yeah, an even more extreme version.
Yeah, it was Black Friday. Black Friday or Tuesday? No, it was Black Friday, right? No, Tuesday.
I don't know.
Yeah. We just had Black Friday.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, yeah, but nevertheless. So yeah, the Great Depression happens. And I'm sure you're probably like, well, why did that happen? So the Great Depression, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's basically literally the total collapse of the kind of economic system, but it's like the banking system as a whole. But it's connected not with your kind of general banking. It's connected, as Jordan said, with the stock market. So it's still the same issue. So what happens with the Great Depression is that there was still over leveraging or over lending, same kind of terminology. But instead, that money, instead of it going to buy whatever, milk, at the grocery store, that overlending was used to buy stocks within the stock market. And so the stock market became extremely overvalued. And not only was it extremely overvalued, which has happened throughout kind of history, like arguably anyone who's
There's been
paid
other
attention to the
times,
stock market in the last kind of 2 years with COVID, the stock market has become overvalued. But not only did it become overvalued, but the percentage or the amount of money that was in the stock market that came out of leverage, which is loans, right? Credit, was, I forget the exact percentage. I do apologize. But you can find that information out. But yeah, essentially the stock market, the majority of things were based off of people using credit to buy into the stock market.
Yeah.
And so when the stock market collapsed, people couldn't pay their loans. People started to panic because obviously
Defaulting,
the stock market is collapsing. They needed to take their money out, so on and so forth. Like, people couldn't get their money out because all the money was just poof gone like that, because that's what happens when a stock market collapses. For anyone who didn't get their money out of the stock market in time, which is the majority of people, so that kind of completely implodes the system as a whole, right? Like, so you have a central bank, like, so as we mentioned, the U.S. at the time has the Federal Reserve. Canada has the Bank of Canada in 18. It's shortly after like Confederation,
so probably like late 1860s, early 1870s.
I was just gonna say, I think it was the 1860s, if I remember correctly.
Well, we confederated,
it's pretty soon after.
So yeah.
Most places within the world have a central bank, or like maybe they did, like, because certain countries have gone through revolutions and stuff like that. It might not be the same central bank, but they had some version of that. So this is like ends up being like a relatively global crisis, not
Phenomenon.
everywhere, because stock markets weren't open to just literally everywhere in the world like they kind of are today. But kind of parts of Europe and the United States and like everywhere gets hit really, really hard. Because the stock market crashes. And when that crashed and the leveraging was the reason for it as well, the banks couldn't recoup their money. And when the banks couldn't recoup their money, the banks started to default. And when the banks started to default, then people couldn't get their money. And then the central banks couldn't pay out, bail out the banks. It's just a mess. Yeah. An absolute mess. In terms of overall situations. And so it takes a decade, 10 years for that system to recover. Where basically overnight people had nothing. Because the value of their currency just collapsed, because even if you had money, right? Like, let's say you had money that wasn't in the bank, because overnight the value, like the banks themselves collapsed. Essentially, the currency that you had was worthless. Right?
It's now worthless.
So yeah, not great times. So central banking, again, kind of out of that. That's when a lot more of the stricter how much you can lend, right? All that kind of stuff that comes into play
after this.
Definitely comes out of the Great Depression. It's not perfect, as you should be, or hopefully you're well aware, because it happens kind of a few times more after that point, with the over leveraging of funds both in the stock market and other ways.
Happened in
so
the
yeah
80s.
we kind of well, I should say, just a bit of a side before we kind of fast forward a little bit further. So obviously they recover, but the other kind of interesting thing that happens with central banking is central banks become for not every country in the world, but for the vast majority of countries, they become the only way that new currency can be created. Like, so obviously you hear about all the time, the U.S. like Federal Reserve is printing money, right? So that's kind of like one kind of neat thing that happens. Now there's a bit of a asterisk with that we'll get into. Depending on timing, it'll be either in this episode or maybe a future episode, but there are other ways that money gets created besides the physical printing of money. But yeah, so the Federal Reserve occurs, right? Like it gets created. It's kind of an interesting concept of how the Federal Reserve works as a whole. I might save that for another episode as a whole. Like,
we can
on a timing standpoint of things,
functionality of that.
Like maybe I'll save it for a history episode or something like that, just to be like, hey, this is how it works. Or a one-off, just a snapshot.
But yeah, to your
episode. But yeah, so we're gonna fast forward again,
jump ahead
a little bit to 1944.
Right. War.
So I was just gonna say, Jordan, what's our time? What's our place in history in 1944?
I think it's the Yalta Conference, isn't it? Or
is that the name of it?
I don't know.
But in terms of the context of just kind of like global history, it's a year away from Victory Day. For World War II.
It's still big war going on, definitely.
Germany is getting slightly closer to
Yeah, and it's still about a year until Japan capitulates. So like, yeah, it's
yeah
the
because
end of the
Japan
war, but it's
is
not over by any means. Yeah,
like September of
August.
1945.
They're in
Is it
August. Yeah,
August? Okay,
yeah,
sure. Yeah, I was gonna say you'd know these things better, but yeah. So a year out from the full end of the war, but essentially the Allied powers get together. So Canada, the United States, France, Great Britain. Um,
yeah. France
I
was there
don't
in
know if
spirit.
anyone else was there.
Russia.
Was Russia? Yeah, Russia was
Yes.
there.
Yeah. It was mostly Russia,
Because I was going to
Britain,
say,
and
like, I
and the
obviously I
United
know
States
that
that
Russia was a
decided.
part of
Yeah.
the Allied powers, but oh yeah, the United States. Did I mention them? I was
Yeah.
just trying to think because I was like, it's not technically all the Allied powers that were
No,
there,
it's
but
pretty
like,
much the big three that
but
decide
it,
it all. It's Russia,
yeah,
Britain,
but
and
I did
United
think it was
Kingdom.
interesting. So Canada was there, it like had a representative there. So,
Yes.
but nevertheless, 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement is signed. Right.
Yes.
Hey everyone, Editor Braden here. A slight note of clarification. There was actually 44 nations that signed the Bretton Woods Agreement. So, as special as it was that Canada was there, they weren't necessarily one of a small handful, but still a big deal. All right, back to the episode. And so, the reason why I kind of asked about like the context of where we are in terms of history, um, World War II, right at the height, and kind of 1 year out from the end of things. Obviously, Europe has gone through a lot up until this point, right?
Yeah.
Um, bear in mind that kind of whatever 20 odd years, or well, 20 to 30 years prior, they just went through World War One, right? Like,
Yeah.
so Europe's gone through a lot in the last kind of 30-ish years. The Great
A lot of
Depression, right? Like all of
destruction.
these
Yeah.
things. Yeah. Lots of turmoil that's going on, both physically and kind of economically and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So the Bretton Woods Agreement is signed, and what that agreement does is that, so as you hopefully have kind of kept up with, and I know we've talked a lot and all that kind of stuff, but up until this point, all money is still backed by gold, right?
Yes.
So they still, even these banks that we're talking about with banknotes and all that stuff, they all have gold in their reserves. So the deposits that we were talking about are gold, or backed by gold, right?
Yeah.
So like the central banks hold gold, the regular banks hold gold. Yes, paper money is still the like kind of main way that people pay for things,
Yeah. It's a
but
standard.
yeah, it's still the kind of like standard of things. So the Bretton Woods Agreement is signed, and that's a huge shift. So what happens is that again, like many agreements that that we've even talked about on this channel already, but we'll probably continue to talk about. A small group of people make a decision for the entire world, that the the United States would be the only country in the world that would have its currency backed by gold, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so every other currency in the world, whether that be Canada, whether that be England, France,
Whoever
whatever,
else.
Russia,
Yeah.
Germany, doesn't really matter. Everyone else's currency will have to be backed by the US dollar.
Oh, yeah.
And what I mean by backed is its value is derived from its equivalent relation to the US dollar. So how many dollars you have in circulation based off of all that kind of stuff. So central banks still might have gold, right? It wasn't that like the banks of all these countries were useless. I should also point out, kind of with the World War II aspect, is that leading up to and kind of during World War II, and I guess even technically somewhat prior, I think. But like when did Fort Knox get created? I can't remember. Maybe I'm getting too off track here. But an interesting point is that parts of Europe, even post World War II, kind of during the Cold War era and stuff like that, a lot of countries started to send their gold to the United States for kind of safekeeping. Because I guess it's really looked at as like, unless Canada and Mexico and the United States are going to go to war with each other, North America is probably one of the most stable areas within the world, right?
Yeah.
Europe has shown to be a bit of a ticking time bomb for different things. Right. So not only do the United States have great ways to secure their gold, as now with the Bretton Woods Agreement, that they are the sole currency that is backed by gold. So they have to make sure that their gold is protected in that sense. But like Germany and other countries sent their gold to the United States kind of after World War II in that sense. All currencies backed by the US dollar. The US dollar is backed by gold. So that's a really kind of interesting point. When the kind of fluctuation of gold prices globally happens, that affects the US dollar. And it kind of controls a lot of different aspects of what the United States is able to do with their money. So in having everyone backed by the US dollar, the demand for US dollars also increases, right? So that helps the value of the US dollar, right?
Yeah.
But it also runs the issue of that because the money is backed by gold, you can't really print new money as easily, right?
Yeah.
Because the amount of gold is going to be like, if I have, unless I get more gold, I can't create more currencies without like diluting the value of the current paper money that is in circulation.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? Excuse me. So for like, it's the same way that's always existed, but essentially your money is really the like kind of total value of weight of gold divided by the amount of kind of dollars in circulation, right?
Yeah.
You have a situation where in the United States, they, well, due to kind of global reasons as well, like certain financial crises happen, right?
Yeah.
It still is not like a perfect system in that sense because of war and over leveraging and certain countries failing and all that kind of stuff. But essentially in 1971,
it's a bit later on,
something like that.
Yeah,
I think it's or early 70s. President Nixon decides to what's called float the dollar, or well, technically others have done this prior to this, so I should clarify. Other presidents have floated the dollar before, and what that means is that they remove the US dollar from being backed by gold. So instead,
they float. Okay.
Yeah. So the idea, I guess, really actually in Nixon's case, he doesn't really float the dollar because he full out just removes it, and that is the end of it. The floating of the dollar is just like in terms of the like, kind of terminology, is more the like hypothetical that it will eventually get like settle back down, so to speak.
Yes, and it'll recover itself.
Yeah, reconnect with gold, but rather than floating above it, right? It forever after 1971 or whatever it is, stays like floating above it, so it never
Yeah.
connects back with gold. So today, in our current system, there is no money other than technically, this is it. Now I'm getting all over the place, but the situation with Gaddafi when he was trying to make an African currency, like a currency for just Africa,
Yeah.
to kind of leave the global economic system.
Yeah.
He was trying to create something that was based solely around gold. But that aside, all the other currencies of the world are not backed by gold. They're essentially what they're backed by is the value you kind of put towards those countries.
Yes.
And so kind of the overall stability of those countries, whether you want to do business with those countries, so on and so forth, right? The kind of the reason why Nixon did that was because, again, like I said, they were going through a bit of an economic crisis.
There was the gas shortage at that time. I remember. Yeah. Well, I wasn't alive.
Yeah.
I just remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not that old.
No, not yet.
Not even close. But like I kind of mentioned before, is when the U.S. is tied to gold, right? And the amount of money that the U.S. prints is going to be very reflective of like their connection with the amount of gold that they have. But they also, on top of that, don't have the freedom to just do whatever they want, because if they dilute their gold or their currency, it also inversely affects every other currency. Yeah. So if I dilute the US dollar, then I'm inflating every other currency as well. Because unless they are also manipulating their currency, so on and so forth, right?
To the same extent.
Yeah. So the ability to keep things balanced is very difficult. So kind of a history of global economics or just economics as a whole, when it comes to currencies, is we always are running into a situation where, do I have enough money to spread around to buy all the different things that I need, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really kind of what comes, like, this is why all currencies, it's said that we want all currencies to be inflationary currencies, right? Because what happens is if we've kind of tied up all of our money in other things, right? We don't have the money to go buy these new things over here, right? And so we need to have a system where I'm constantly kind of putting new money in, which again inflates devalues the currency, but it inflates the cost of goods naturally, because we're creating more money. So if there's more money in circulation, that means there's more people that are able to spend money. And if there's more people able to spend money, then now my thing that used to be $5 is now, there's too many people that can buy it, so now I'm going to have to charge $7. So because the thing itself might still hold the same value, but that value is on a different scale now, because the money is on a different scale. If there was only $1 million in circulation, well, now there's $10 million in circulation, right? Like, so on and so forth. I know, a lot of crazy things, a lot of numbers. This is the as you're gonna kind of feel already, probably, especially because we're almost 2 hours into this. The modern economic system is very confusing in a lot of different ways. It makes a lot of sense in some ways, but it's way more convoluted than your simple, I have some gold, here you go. Or I have a sheep, you have a cow, can we trade?
It's evolved to
way
recycling
more
of in like in a system based on the fact that there will be more to back it later, kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Great way to put it. So yeah, the United States needs to put some money to build up infrastructure and a bunch of other things and bail out some people and all that kind of stuff. So they float the dollar. That means no one else is kind of necessarily connected to the US dollar. We're all individually, our currencies are valued with what they are valued at, based off of the demand for those currencies. So currency in itself becomes a supply and demand game.
Yeah.
The US dollar still remains the world's reserve currency.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting point, because it's not like, it's not so much that the US dollar is backed by a physical thing. It's almost like the global faith within that system, and that's
Correct.
shown in a few different ways. But that's what gives the US its value.
Its value.
And then you're kind of comparing yourself to the US and their economy and their kind of everything, right? So a big thing, like I said, the supply and demand aspect. So one thing in particular, Henry Kissinger, who's, I guess at the time, like I don't know what it's called in the States, like foreign secretary or some
yeah,
I don't know exactly what his role was at the time, but he created a deal with Saudi Arabia, that Saudi Arabia and indirectly kind of OPEC, the kind of nations that the oil nations, of like the Middle East and surrounding areas, that they would sell they would sell all of their oil using US dollars.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, and up until recently this is still the case, you would have to use US dollars. So you could be England, right? Top cheese England, or used to be top cheese England, and you couldn't use the British pound or the euro would eventually,
as currency,
right? As currency to buy oil from Saudi Arabia or wherever else, right?
It has to be in US dollars.
The OPEC nations. Yeah. And so because of that, if you then, if I'm the Bank of England or whatever, I have to now take my local currency and exchange it for US dollars.
Yeah.
And so that exchange situation, right? Everyone hears about exchange rates when they want to travel the world and all that kind of stuff. That is what kind of artificially, in some ways, you could say, gives the US dollar its value. Now, I'm not saying that that's the only piece. The economy of the United States in its own right gives it its value, right? It is, a lot of people want to do business there. It's a very, all things considered, it's considered a relatively like stable country. There's a large population, so there's a large consumer demand, right? Like all those kind of reasons give money its value, right? Because you can buy US goods with US dollars, right? And you can pay US citizens with US dollars and so on and so forth, right? So that kind of, all those different rationales are what give the US its value, so to speak. And the US has, like the deal with Saudi Arabia and OPEC, kind of done some certain things to make sure that they maintain the value of the world's reserve currency and like the reason for it, right? Because they're kind of considered the dominant currency, right?
Yeah.
And so when you kind of constantly are making your value of currency higher and higher, you can inversely dilute it and inflate it by printing more and more money, because your kind of room for that wiggle room just keeps increasing. Because well, there's more demand. everyone wants to buy oil. Well, now we got to print more money, right? Like, so then we
Yeah.
can justify a lot more. And it's a little bit more fluid in that sense in comparison to when they were backed by the gold standard.
Gold standard, yeah.
They really kind of had their hands tied with a lot of things. Again, it's
always
not to say that this is the greatest solution.
No, yeah, we know, because there's another conversation to be had about that entirely as well. Yes.
yeah, and maybe potentially going off of that, like, just because we're already, this is probably easily our longest episode, but it's arguably one of the largest things that we talk about. I'm going to just quickly, because again, we can do this in other episodes. How money is created today, right? So we've kind of touched on a little bit of like what gives money its value, right? It's a very little bit convoluted system. It's really just like, I feel that this is what it is.
Yeah, it's good to graze over, because, to your defense, we can get into the weeds with that one.
Yeah. I already feel like this is a very long one. But it's a lot of stuff. So I feel like this is a good place to end it, in the sense of, okay, where are we now? Right. So we don't have the gold standard anymore. Money is not worth or connected by anything. It's more connected by the feeling that we have towards a given economy, a given government, all that kind of stuff. Do we want to buy those goods? Do we think that they're stable? All that good stuff. But that doesn't fully answer kind of like how money is created, right? We don't have the Goldsmiths anymore, right? We did talk about central banks. They have the ability to print money. So we talked about the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Canada. They can print physical bills. So that's kind of one side of it. The central bank / like governments, I guess you could say, because some central banks are very connected with their governments. Others are a little bit more separated. They're able to print money, right?
Yeah.
That's one side of it. The vast majority of money that is created today, I should maybe check myself. That might not be 100% accurate. It could be, but I'm going to reel that back. A large chunk of money that is created today is created through debt. All money today is debt. It's all, at the end of the day, it's all just IOUs. And so the way that works is that if you go to the bank, whatever bank is around you, right? Scotiabank or whatever. In the States, you go to Chase or, I don't know, Bank of America, or if you're anywhere in the world, right? You go to your bank and you say, I want to take out a loan. In doing that, you are creating money. And that's what's known as fractional reserve banking. Right? So we've already talked about all this stuff. Now it's kind of given a name, right? And fractional reserve banking is that you can take portions of your bank reserves and loan it out to the extreme, right? So every single time you want to go get a house, right? You get a mortgage for your house, hundreds of thousands of dollars. That money is not physical money. That is coming out of anything in particular. And in almost all cases, not necessarily all, because like some money is related to actual physical money, but in most cases, that money has kind of come out of thin air, right? The bank itself has created that money. Now, not all banks have the ability to make loans. In Canada, like our central 5 or 6 banks, they can all, you can get a mortgage for them, you can get loans for them.
Correct.
But like, I don't actually know this for certain, but like smaller banks don't have that ability. I was going to name a bank, but I'm not going to do that because I don't even really know if that's true for that particular bank. But in a general sense, only certain banks are allowed to create loans. Now in the United States, that's very different. Pretty much all the banks are able to give it a loan. And that's why you'll also see in the United States, there are hundreds of banks. In Canada, we do not have that. We have a very different system. Again, I'm not going to get into it because it's already crazy on our timing situation. And my brain is going to go to mush. So the fractional reserve banking is this idea that you can take part of your reserves and you can loan it out a bunch of times over, and that is actually what creates a lot of the money that exists.
Yeah.
And we've already kind of talked about that, but it's that idea that you now have, you used to have $100, now that $100 is worth $900.
Yeah.
Right, because you took that $100 and you loaned it out to 8 other people, and that 8 other people each got $100, and now that $100 got inflated to 900, right?
Exactly.
And so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of,
yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Like, I don't know, do you have any kind of questions about any of that? That make all make sense for everyone who's probably listening?
Yeah. No, I think because
Okay.
I'm not like,
yeah,
I would say economically attuned. So
yeah, exactly, and that's why I lean to you to be like, am I talking craziness? I'm sure I am for a lot of people, but that's the kind of gist of it. You can listen to this episode more than once.
Yes, I feel
oh, sorry.
When we get further into in another conversation, we can get a little more into the modern end of it. I'm sure there'll be questions, but I mean, in terms of just how like currencies work and stuff, I think we've covered it pretty well.
Exactly. I think we can do more information on this stuff, so it's totally we'll have definitely more
currency realm and more
episodes.
into political decisions as well.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so many layers with it. But yeah, again, kind of just like in summary of everything. No worries. In summary of everything, money still has value. A lot of people try to throw it out there like, oh, money has no value. It does have value. It's just a little bit more loose with how it's valued. The bigger issue, I think, is the kind of how easy money can be created, which then causes the system, and that's like kind of getting into the little politics of it all, of how fragile certain things can be, right? Like we're dealing with in a time of not hyperinflation, larger inflation. I apologize, my dog is barking now.
We're getting close to hyper.
Yeah, well, it feels that way.
I mean, at this rate, by this time next year, we'll be burning money to stay warm.
Yeah, so. But so the feeling that the money situation is can be a little bit more fragile than we would want it, right? But again, I'm going to leave it there. We're going to touch base about all these things a lot further. My house is going crazy now that everyone's home. So on that note, I appreciate you sticking with us till the end. If you did, feel free to definitely give it a few listens through. I know it's a lot of information. Maybe piecemeal it a bit and don't watch it all at once if you need. But yeah, hopefully you learned some cool things.
That's it. That's what we're here for.
But as always, I'm Braden. He's Jordan. We are the Realist Idealists, and this is Powerview.